A millionaire's little boy was dying, yet doctors found nothing wrong. Every night his room grew colder until his grandmother looked under his bed. What she found that night will break your heart. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The Whitmore estate stood proudly on the edge of the countryside, surrounded by tall oaks that whispered secrets to the wind. The mansion looked like it belonged in a painting. Marble pillars, glimmering glass, and a garden so meticulously arranged it almost seemed afraid to grow wild. Yet behind its perfection was a silence that felt heavy, like the kind that follows after laughter dies. Inside, the halls were spotless but strangely hollow. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo for miles. It was a house where money could buy anything except warmth. On the second floor, behind a white door decorated with golden initials, lay a boy named Oliver Whitmore. He was only 8, but he looked much older in sorrow. His face was pale, his lips dry, and his eyes, once bright and curious, now stared blankly at the ceiling most of the day. Sometimes he smiled faintly when his grandmother came to see him, but the smile faded too soon. Like sunlight swallowed by fog, doctors had come and gone for months, bringing machines, medicines, and promises. None of them stayed long. They all said the same thing: he's perfectly healthy, but everyone could see he wasn't. His body was fine, yet he was fading, as if something inside him was slowly being drained away. Downstairs, the boy's father, Charles Whitmore, paced the grand hallway, phone pressed to his ear. He was the image of power, tall, composed, and dressed in expensive suits. To the world, he was a respected businessman. At home, he was a man afraid to look his son in the eyes. He spoke in short, sharp sentences, hiding the tremor in his voice. Whenever someone asked how Oliver was doing, his answer was always the same: he'll recover soon. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Across the garden, in a smaller guest house covered in ivy, lived Eleanor Whitmore, Oliver's grandmother. She was the only one who still moved through the mansion with quiet authority, her silver hair always tied neatly, her expression calm but deeply observant. She had raised Charles alone after her husband's death, and though she admired his success, she often wondered what it had cost him to become so emotionless. Every morning, she visited Oliver's room with a tray of warm milk and honey, though she knew he would barely touch it. She would sit beside his bed, take his fragile hand in hers, and whisper, "You must fight, my dear. Your mother would want that." The mention of his mother always brought a faint flicker to Oliver's eyes. Emily Whitmore had died in a car crash when Oliver was only 2. The boy had no memories of her, or so everyone thought. But sometimes, in the quiet of night, he spoke softly in his sleep, calling a name no one had taught him to remember. That morning, as Eleanor set the tray down, she noticed something peculiar. The air in the room was colder than the rest of the house, almost biting. The curtains fluttered lightly, though the windows were closed. She rubbed her arms, feeling a chill creep over her skin. "Did you sleep well, darling?" she asked. Oliver shook his head slowly. His voice came out as a whisper. "She sang again, Grandma." Eleanor paused. "Who did?" "The lady under the bed," he said, eyes wide but distant. "She sings when the lights go out." The grandmother's heart skipped. "You had a dream, my love." "Just a dream." But Oliver shook his head again. "No, she said she misses me." Eleanor forced a smile, though her hands trembled. When she leaned down to adjust his blanket, she noticed something else, a faint scent of old roses. It was warm and sweet, but it didn't belong. No one in the house used that perfume anymore. Later that day, she mentioned it to the maid, who quickly crossed herself. "I clean the room every day, ma'am. But that bed gives me the creeps. Sometimes I swear it's colder underneath than anywhere else." Eleanor frowned. "Colder?" "Yes, ma'am. Like a draft from nowhere. Once I tried to move it, but it's heavy as stone." That evening, Eleanor sat alone in the study, the fireplace crackling softly. On the table before her lay an old photograph of Emily, her late daughter-in-law. Emily had been beautiful, gentle, and full of warmth. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. The house had been alive back then, Laughter in the halls, music in the evenings, sunlight streaming through open windows. But after the accident, Charles changed. He locked away every trace of his wife, her portraits, her clothes, even her jewelry. He said it was for Oliver's sake, but Eleanor suspected it was to protect himself from his own grief. As the night deepened, thunder rolled across the hills. The mansion's lights flickered for a moment, and the silence afterward felt unnatural. Eleanor couldn't shake off the feeling that something unseen was breathing within those walls. She decided to check on Oliver one last time before bed. His room was dimly lit by a nightlamp shaped like a moon. The boy was asleep, curled under his blanket, his breathing uneven. Eleanor stepped closer, smoothing his hair. Then she heard it, faint but unmistakable, a whispering hum, a lullaby. The same tune Emily used to hum when Oliver was a baby. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound was coming from beneath the bed. She knelt slowly, her old knees protesting, and leaned forward. The shadows under the bed seemed thicker than they should have been. She reached for her phone to use the flashlight, but before she could switch it on, something cold brushed her hand, soft, like fabric. She pulled back instantly, her heart pounding. She forced herself to look again. For a brief second, she thought she saw the corner of something, a cloth maybe, or a small wooden box, before darkness swallowed it. Eleanor stood up quickly, glancing around the room. The air was still cold, the smell of roses stronger now. Oliver stirred in his sleep, whispering again, "She's here, Grandma. Don't be scared." Tears welled in her eyes. "Who, darling? Who's here?" But the boy had already drifted back into deep sleep. That night, Eleanor couldn't rest. She sat awake, turning over possibilities in her mind. Was this just the imagination of a lonely child? Or something more? A message, a memory trying to surface? By morning, she made up her mind. She would not call another doctor. She would find out what was beneath that bed herself. At breakfast, Charles appeared looking tired but guarded. "Mother, you shouldn't fill Oliver's head with stories," he said sharply, stirring his coffee. "He needs rest, not more fantasy." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm the one telling stories?" Charles sighed. "He's a sick child. He's confused. Don't encourage it. Then explain the cold air in his room," she replied calmly. "Or the way he talks about Emily as if she visits him." His jaw tightened. "Enough, Mother. That's not open for discussion." She stared at him for a long moment. "You can shut the windows, Charles. You can lock the doors. But grief doesn't disappear because you pretend it's gone." He didn't answer. He just stood and left the table, muttering something about meetings and deadlines. But Eleanor saw the flicker in his eyes. Fear, not anger. Later that afternoon, she returned to Oliver's room while he was playing quietly with his toy car. Sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, but the air still felt unnaturally cold. She knelt down again, brushing the dust beneath the bed frame. Her fingers met the edge of something rough, wooden, small and solid. She tried to pull it out, but it was wedged tight. "Grandma, what are you doing?" Oliver asked softly. "Just tidying up, sweetheart," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor returned. The hallway clock struck midnight. Rain pattered softly against the windows. She entered the room quietly, careful not to wake Oliver. The moonlight poured through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. She bent down again, her heart hammering. This time she was determined. She gripped the object beneath the bed and tugged. With a sharp pull, it came loose, a small wooden box covered in dust, its edges worn smooth with age. She brushed it off with trembling hands. The lock was rusted, fragile. With the tip of a hairpin, she managed to pry it open. The lid creaked. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, lay three things: a tiny silver bracelet with little charms shaped like stars, a folded photograph half burned at the corners, and a broken locket, one side missing its glass, the other engraved faintly with the words, "For my sweet Oliver, love, Mama." Eleanor froze. Her throat tightened and tears blurred her vision. She touched the locket gently. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for her. Behind her, Oliver stirred in his sleep and murmured something she could barely hear. She leaned closer. She said, "Thank you," he whispered, still dreaming. "She's happy now." Eleanor looked back at the open box, her heart pounding in her chest. The scent of roses filled the room again, stronger, sweeter, comforting this time. The curtains swayed gently, though no wind entered from outside. For the first time in months, Oliver slept without shivering. His breathing was calm, steady. A faint smile rested on his lips. Eleanor sat by his side until dawn, the box resting quietly in her lap. Somewhere deep in her heart, she felt it, a presence, tender and familiar, watching over them both, and though she couldn't explain it, she knew one thing for certain. The darkness that had haunted that room was not made of sickness, but of forgotten love. Morning arrived softly, painting the mansion's windows in golden light. For the first time in months, the sun didn't feel unwelcome in Oliver's room. The boy still slept, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that had been missing for far too long. Beside him, Eleanor sat in the armchair, the small wooden box resting on her lap, like a secret she wasn't ready to share with anyone. She hadn't slept at all. Every hour of the night had been spent staring at that locket, tracing the engraved words with her thumb. "For my sweet Oliver, love, Mama." It was Emily's handwriting. She would recognize it anywhere. But what haunted Eleanor wasn't just the discovery itself. It was the question of how the box got there. Under Oliver's bed, hidden and forgotten for years. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with quiet activity. The maids prepared breakfast, the gardener trimmed the roses, and Charles Whitmore's voice echoed faintly from his office, sharp and commanding over the phone. He was already working, already pretending everything was fine. He didn't know yet that something in the house had shifted overnight. Eleanor stepped quietly into the hallway. Her reflection followed her in the polished floors, a dignified woman carrying the weight of too many unspoken truths. She entered the study and placed the box on the desk, the faint smell of roses still clinging to it. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a steadying breath, then whispered softly, "Emily, what are you trying to tell me?" When she opened her eyes, the photograph caught the light, the half-burned one she'd found inside. It showed Emily holding a toddler, her smile tender and full of life. Oliver couldn't have been more than 2, but something about the picture struck Eleanor as odd. Behind them, blurred by the old camera, was the very same nursery. The wallpaper, the bed, even the window curtains. They hadn't changed. The box hadn't been placed randomly. It had been hidden there deliberately, where Emily and her child once played. Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Margaret, the long-time housekeeper, a woman in her 50s who had served the Whitmores for decades. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently. "I've prepared your tea." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you, Margaret. Tell me, did you know about this box?" The woman frowned. "Box, ma'am." Eleanor slid it across the desk. Margaret leaned closer, her face paling slightly as she caught sight of the locket. "Oh dear, I haven't seen that in years. I thought Mr. Charles had thrown everything of Mrs. Emily's away after the accident." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "He said he did." Margaret hesitated, glancing toward the door, as if afraid of being overheard. After she passed, "The master ordered us to remove all her belongings. I packed most of it myself. But that night, something strange happened. I remember going to her room to fetch a few more boxes, and when I returned, one was missing. I assumed one of the men had taken it. Did you tell Charles?" "I did, ma'am. He told me to forget it. Said it didn't matter anymore." Eleanor sighed, running a hand through her silver hair. "He was wrong." "It mattered more than he ever knew." She dismissed Margaret with a nod, then lifted the locket again. Its clasp had rusted, but she managed to open it with care. Inside was a faded photograph, a close-up of baby Oliver, smiling, eyes full of life. She felt a lump rise in her throat. Somewhere deep within, she felt Emily's spirit near, not haunting but reaching out, not to scare, but to heal. When she returned to Oliver's room, the boy was awake, sitting up with his blanket wrapped around him. His cheeks had a hint of color for the first time in weeks. "Good morning, Grandma," he said softly. "Good morning, my dear," she replied, her heart swelling at the sound of his voice. "How are you feeling today?" "I had a nice dream," he said, eyes shining faintly. "Mama was there." She was sitting on the edge of the bed, singing. She told me I'd get better soon. Eleanor smiled through tears. And what did you say to her? I said I miss her. She said she never left. The grandmother sat beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. She's right, you know. She's always with you here. She touched his chest gently. And here. He smiled, then looked toward the floor. Grandma? Yes, darling. There's something else under the bed now. Eleanor froze. What do you mean? She left me something, Oliver whispered. But she said I can't touch it until you see it first. The word sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Slowly, she bent down, heart pounding. The wooden box she'd taken was gone from under the bed. She had it in her hands. Yet beneath the frame, something new was there. A folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled. She reached for it cautiously, unfolding it under the morning light. It was a page from an old children's book, one that used to belong to Emily. On it was written in delicate handwriting, "Love doesn't disappear. It waits to be remembered." Eleanor's breath caught. It was Emily's handwriting again. She felt tears sting her eyes as Oliver watched curiously. Later that day, Eleanor decided to tell Charles everything. She found him in his office, surrounded by papers and tension. His eyes barely lifted from his laptop when she entered. "What is it, Mother?" "I'm busy. This can't wait," she said firmly, placing the box in front of him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Something that belonged to Emily. Something you tried to bury." He opened the box reluctantly. The moment he saw the locket, his face changed. The color drained away, his hand trembling slightly. "Where did you find this?" "Under your son's bed," she replied. "Care to explain how it got there?" His jaw clenched. "I don't know. Maybe the staff—" "Don't lie to me, Charles." Her voice was calm but sharp. "You told me you removed everything connected to her. You made this house forget she ever lived here." "Why?" He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. "Because it was killing me," he shouted. "Every corner, every sound reminded me of her. I couldn't stand it, Mother. I thought if I erased her from this place, I could breathe again." Eleanor watched him quietly. "And did you?" He didn't answer. He just stared out at the rain-soaked garden. "She was my wife," he said finally, voice breaking. "I loved her more than my own life. But every time I saw Oliver, I saw her eyes, her smile. I couldn't bear it. So I shut it all away, the memories, the laughter, even her scent. I thought if I built walls high enough, the pain wouldn't reach me." Eleanor's tone softened. "And yet it reached Oliver instead." Charles turned sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your silence became his sickness," she said. "You buried love and the emptiness filled him instead. He's been carrying the grief you refused to face." He sank into the chair, head in his hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the room. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep again. She sat in the nursery, the box open on her lap, the locket gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The air felt different now, not as cold, but still heavy with memory. She whispered into the quiet, "Emily, what do you want us to remember?" The curtains fluttered softly. The scent of roses returned, gentle and warm. Oliver stirred but didn't wake. His face was peaceful. Eleanor felt a small current of air brush her cheek, light as a kiss. And in that instant she knew. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by forgotten love, waiting to be acknowledged. The next morning she placed the locket on Oliver's bedside table. When he woke and saw it, his eyes lit up. "It's hers," he said, smiling. "She said it belongs here," Eleanor nodded. "Then it shall stay here." From that day forward, Oliver's recovery continued. His laughter returned, quiet at first, then louder each day. The doctors were astonished, unable to explain the sudden improvement. They called it psychological relief, but Eleanor knew better. Love had returned to the room, unseen, but deeply felt. Yet one thing still lingered in her mind, the message on that old paper. Love doesn't disappear. It waits to be remembered. Someone had placed it there. But who and how? That night, as the moonlight spilled across the nursery floor, Eleanor noticed something new. The mirror opposite the bed seemed to shimmer faintly, as though a soft light flickered within it. and for the briefest second she saw her reflection standing beside another, a young woman with gentle eyes and a familiar smile. Eleanor's breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched as the reflection of Emily leaned down toward the sleeping child, brushed her fingers across his hair, and disappeared into the glow of dawn. The next few days at the Whitmore mansion passed in a strange calm. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty. It felt alive, almost listening. Oliver's health continued to improve. He ate his meals, laughed softly at his grandmother's stories, and even ventured outside for short walks in the garden. The boy who once looked like a shadow now had color in his cheeks and curiosity in his eyes. Eleanor watched him with wonder every morning. She could feel it. Something invisible yet gentle had shifted in the house. The air was warmer. The scent of roses lingered softly in the hallways, and even the light through the windows seemed less harsh. But there was still an unspoken weight between her and her son Charles. He had avoided her since their confrontation. He still came home late, still buried himself in work. But the few times their eyes met, she saw a trace of guilt. Guilt and something else, fear. One afternoon, while Eleanor was helping Oliver draw in the study, she noticed him sketching something unusual. A woman, drawn in soft pencil lines, stood beside a little boy. The woman's hair was long, her eyes kind, and her hand rested on the boy's shoulder. "That's a lovely picture," Eleanor said gently.
"Who's that, sweetheart?"
Oliver smiled shyly. "It's Mama. She told me to draw this. She said it helps her stay close." Eleanor's heart tightened. "Did she talk to you again, darling?" He nodded, still focused on the drawing. "She said Daddy's very sad, but he hides it. She said he needs to remember her." Eleanor's hand trembled as she touched the edge of the paper. "And what did she say to you?" "That I should give this to Daddy," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That evening, Eleanor carried the drawing downstairs. Charles was in his office again, staring at a pile of documents, but clearly not reading them. The glow from his desk lamp threw deep shadows across his face. He looked up when she entered, weary and guarded. "What now, Mother?" he asked, though his voice lacked the usual edge. She placed the drawing before him. "Your son made this." He glanced at it absent-mindedly, but the moment his eyes landed on the image, his expression froze. He leaned closer, his lips parting slightly. This was Emily's favorite dress," he whispered. "And the pendant. She wore it every day." Eleanor said softly, "Oliver says she told him to draw it. She said you need to remember her." Charles stood abruptly, pacing the room. "This has gone too far. You're encouraging him, Mother. You're filling his head with things that will only hurt him later." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "Do you truly believe that? Or are you afraid that remembering her will hurt you?" He stopped, turning toward her, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. I watched her die, Mother. The car caught fire before I could reach her. I tried, I swear I did, but the flames..." He clenched his fists, trembling. "When they pulled me away, she was still calling my name. I couldn't save her. So don't ask me to remember that night again." Eleanor stepped closer, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "Charles, you're not being asked to remember the pain. You're being asked to remember her love. You've built this entire house out of silence, and that silence nearly took your son from you. Love buried alive turns cold. You must let it breathe again." He turned away, his voice hoarse. "How? How do I bring her back when she's gone?" Eleanor looked at the locket hanging around her neck. She had kept it since finding it. "Sometimes we bring them back by giving their memory a home," she whispered. "You took everything that belonged to her and hid it away. But love isn't meant to be locked in a box." That night something unusual happened again. As the storm outside howled against the windows, Eleanor woke to faint music. A piano, soft and distant, playing through the corridors. The melody was familiar, the same lullaby Emily used to hum. She followed the sound barefoot, her nightrobe brushing against the polished floors, until she reached the old music room. The piano was uncovered. She had kept it closed for years. But now the keys moved on their own, pressing down slowly, playing that haunting, tender tune. The room smelled faintly of roses again. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, tears filling her eyes. "Emily," she whispered, "I hear you." The music stopped abruptly, as if the air itself had exhaled. The next moment a small draught brushed her cheek, cool but comforting. She turned and saw a faint reflection in the window glass, Emily's soft smile fading slowly into the night. By morning, Eleanor knew what she had to do. She gathered the household staff and asked them to help her open the old storage attic, the one Charles had sealed years ago. Dust filled the air as the door creaked open. Inside were boxes upon boxes labeled E.M., Emily's initials. Dresses, photo albums, books, paintings, memories that had been hidden from sight, but not from the heart. Eleanor spent hours cleaning and sorting through them. She found a diary tied with a faded blue ribbon. When she opened it, the first page read, "If anything happens to me, promise me one thing. Let Oliver grow up knowing I loved him every single day." Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She took the diary and the photo albums downstairs. When Charles saw her carrying them, his face went pale. "Where did you get those?" he whispered. "Where you buried your grief," she answered softly. In the attic, he didn't speak. He just stared at the pile of memories, his eyes flickering between pain and longing. Finally, he reached out, trembling, and picked up the diary. He opened it randomly, reading a few lines, then another and another. By the time he looked up, tears had carved paths down his face. "I thought, if I kept her things away, I could keep my heart from breaking again," he said. "But it's been breaking all along, hasn't it?" Eleanor nodded gently. "Love doesn't vanish, Charles. It just waits for us to have the courage to face it." That night, for the first time in years, Charles walked into his son's room, not as a man haunted by guilt, but as a father seeking forgiveness. Oliver was awake, clutching the locket around his neck. "Daddy," the boy said softly. Charles knelt beside the bed, voice trembling. "Your grandma found something that used to belong to your mother. Do you remember her?" Oliver nodded. "She visits me sometimes. She says she loves you." Charles's breath caught. "She does. She always did." He sat on the edge of the bed, holding his son's tiny hand. The two of them stayed like that for a while, saying nothing, letting the quiet between them speak more than words could. When Eleanor peeked in later, she saw the most beautiful sight, her son and grandson asleep side by side, the locket glowing faintly between them in the moonlight. Over the next few days, the transformation spread beyond the boy's room. The mansion, once heavy with sorrow, began to feel alive again. The scent of flowers filled the halls, laughter returned, and even the servants seemed lighter, as though an invisible fog had lifted. But one mystery still tugged at Eleanor's thoughts, the note she had found under the bed. Love doesn't disappear. It waits to be remembered. She couldn't explain how it had appeared, who placed it there, or why it was written in Emily's hand after all these years. One evening, as she sat by the window watching Oliver play with his toys, a ray of sunlight caught the locket. It glowed softly, and for a fleeting moment she thought she saw a gentle silhouette reflected in the glass. A woman standing behind the boy, smiling proudly. Eleanor didn't move, didn't blink. She just whispered, "Thank you, my dear." The reflection faded, but the warmth lingered. She closed her eyes, feeling peace for the first time in a very long while. She finally understood Emily hadn't come back to haunt. She had come back to heal, to remind them that love, once buried, never dies. It waits, quietly, patiently, for the courage of memory to set it free. The next morning dawned with an unfamiliar brightness at the Whitmore mansion. The house that once felt like a monument to loss now breathed like a living thing again. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, landing softly on the portraits that had hung untouched for years. The heavy drapes were finally drawn back, letting the day in. Eleanor stood by the hallway mirror, adjusting her shawl, and caught her own reflection. Tired, yes, but peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in decades. Downstairs, She heard laughter, real laughter, and her heart swelled. Oliver was in the dining room with Charles, both of them sitting at the breakfast table, talking about something that clearly amused them. It was the kind of simple, ordinary moment she had prayed for. "Daddy says he's going to take me to the park today," Oliver exclaimed, his eyes shining. "We'll fly my kite." Eleanor stepped into the room, smiling softly. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "It's a perfect day for a little wind." Charles looked up at her. His eyes still carried the weight of years gone by, but now there was a spark, a light that had been missing. "Mother," he said quietly, "I was thinking maybe it's time we visited Emily's grave together." "Oliver's never been there." The words caught Eleanor off guard, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "It's time." Later that afternoon, the three of them stood in the small countryside cemetery where Emily rested. The gravestone was simple, elegant, engraved with the words, "Forever loved." Oliver knelt before it, placing a small white rose he had picked from the garden. "Hi, Mama," he said softly. "Daddy and Grandma are here. We're not sad anymore. You can rest now." Charles stood behind him, his jaw tight, hands trembling slightly. He finally knelt beside his son, resting a hand on the gravestone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for shutting you out, for trying to forget. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just running from myself." A soft breeze passed over them, stirring the grass. The air felt almost alive, like a tender touch from something unseen. Oliver looked up and smiled. "She heard you, Daddy. She's smiling." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She didn't need to see to believe. She could feel it, the warmth, the peace, the quiet forgiveness filling the space around them. That night, the house felt lighter than ever. Eleanor sat in the living room with a cup of tea, while Oliver and Charles played chess near the fireplace. The clock ticked softly, the fire crackled, and for the first time the house didn't echo with emptiness. But as midnight approached, something quietly extraordinary happened again. The grandfather clock, which had been broken for years, began to chime, not harshly but softly, as if awakening from a long sleep. Eleanor looked up, startled, then smiled. The melody it played wasn't the usual ticking pattern. It was the same lullaby Emily had once hummed. She placed her teacup down and walked toward the sound, her hand trembling slightly on the polished wood of the clock. The pendulum moved on its own, rhythmic and gentle. Charles entered the room moments later, drawn by the music. "Is it playing?" he asked in disbelief. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, she's saying goodbye." They stood together in silence, letting the soft tune fill the room. Oliver, half asleep on the couch, stirred and mumbled, "Mama's happy now." A faint golden shimmer flickered across the locket on his chest. The glow pulsed once, then slowly dimmed, not disappearing but settling, like a light finally finding peace within its home. Days turned into weeks. The Whitmore mansion changed in ways Eleanor could never have imagined. Charles returned to his work, but not as the cold, distant man he once was. He was gentler, more patient. He made time to read to Oliver every night, to laugh with him, to simply be present. Eleanor reopened the music room and filled it with flowers. On quiet afternoons, she'd sit by the piano, her fingers tracing the keys, waiting for that whisper of melody to return. It never did, but she didn't mind. The silence now felt warm, not empty. One evening, Oliver came running into the room, holding something small in his hand. "Grandma, look what I found!" It was a folded piece of paper, old and slightly faded, tucked inside one of Emily's photo albums. Eleanor carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakably Emily's. It read, "If love is remembered, it never dies. If you ever find this, it means my family has healed. Don't cry for me, I'm already home." Eleanor pressed the note against her chest, her eyes glistening. "Oh, Emily," she whispered, "you were always stronger than any of us." That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Charles joined his mother on the porch. The moonlight bathed the garden in silver. The roses were in full bloom again, their scent filling the air, just as they had in the days when Emily was alive. "She'd have loved this view," Charles said quietly. "You know, I used to dream about her after she died. But lately I don't anymore. I thought it meant I was losing her again. Eleanor smiled faintly. Or maybe it means she's finally at peace. She doesn't need to visit anymore, because she knows you've kept her alive in your heart. Charles nodded slowly. Thank you, Mother. For everything. For saving Oliver. For saving me. Eleanor looked toward the horizon, where the sky began to lighten with dawn. It wasn't me, she said softly. It was her. She never left. She just waited for us to remember. As the first light of morning touched the mansion's old walls, a gentle breeze stirred the roses again. One petal floated free, drifting through the air and landing on Eleanor's hand. She smiled, lifting her gaze skyward, and for just a heartbeat, she thought she saw her, Emily, standing in the golden haze of dawn, smiling the way she used to. Her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. The vision shimmered once, then faded with the wind, but the warmth stayed, a promise fulfilled, a love reborn. Inside the house, the old clock ticked steadily, marking not the passage of time, but the beginning of peace.